Well, good evening. On behalf of the Pew Environment Group and our co-hosts, the World Wildlife Fund, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition, I'm delighted to welcome you all to the National Aquarium and to this historic meeting. The 50th anniversary of the signing of the Antarctic Treaty comes at a time when both poles are sending critical messages about the impacts of global warming. Arctic sea ice is rapidly melting, and the ice shelves of the Antarctic Peninsula are breaking up. The scale and rapidity of the changes that are occurring is likely to have major impacts, not only on life in these regions, but also for the rest of the world. From polar bears and narwhals in the north, to penguins and wandering albatrosses in the south, changes to the Earth's climate threaten to upend all of the world's natural systems with enormous consequences for both people and animal life worldwide. In the past 50 years alone, the western Antarctic Peninsula has warmed more than 4 times faster than the Earth as a whole. And the latest projections indicate that the Arctic is likely to be ice-free in summers within 30 years. Each passing day brings further news of change, the most recent of which appeared just a few weeks ago with news that the Wilkins ice shelf is at risk of partly breaking away from the Antarctic Peninsula. It was only a century ago that expeditionary groups reached both the North and the South Poles. Indeed, up until very recently, the Arctic was icebound year-round, inaccessible, and virtually closed to all major industrial activity, such as commercial shipping, oil and gas extraction, and industrial fishing. As you all know, this is no longer the case. And while the Antarctic Treaty has constrained the territorial ambitions of many countries that sought to claim this region as their own, no such agreement is in place for the Arctic, which is now threatened with a rush to exploit its natural resources. The challenges posed by global warming are enormous, and we have little time to address them. At the end of this year, representatives of the world's nations will convene in Copenhagen to come up with a successor to the Kyoto Protocol, and in this, we must not fail. All of the nations represented at this meeting, and those who aren't, must demonstrate that they are capable of taking a longer perspective and of viewing their national interests as intrinsically tied to the world as a whole. In this, we have a common task. We must work together to put in place policies that will lessen our dependence on fossil fuels, create a new global energy economy, and reduce the emissions that are changing the world's climate. The implementation of these decisions will take time. But in the meantime, we must take a precautionary approach to the way we manage the polar regions. Much of this has already been accomplished in Antarctica through the Antarctic Treaty. In the Arctic, however, there are virtually no controls in place. Unless we move quickly and carefully to constrain a whole host of potentially destructive activities before they take place, we will greatly exacerbate changes to the Arctic environment that are rapidly occurring as a result of retreating sea ice. Specifically, we should prohibit fishing in the Arctic Ocean unless and until it can be shown not to pose significant adverse consequences. Similarly, we should adopt a highly precautionary ecosystem-based approach to the management of fisheries in Antarctica, particularly for krill, which is a key pillar of the entire food chain, supporting everything from penguins to whales to the region's magnificent seabirds. And in the Arctic, we need a science and community-based approach to determine if, where, when, and how to develop the Arctic Ocean's oil and gas resources, an approach that considers such issues as avoidance of important subsistence and ecological areas, spill response capability, and best available technology. And similar conditions need to be placed on the shipping industry. The polar regions are among the most fragile places on Earth. 50 years ago, the signatories to the Antarctic Treaty recognized the need to protect this unique environment and proceeded to make it a collective goal. The wisdom in this decision is more apparent today than ever before. In the face of global warming, these protections need to be reaffirmed, they need to be strengthened, but most importantly, they need to be extended to the north. Avoiding the worst impacts of climate change on the Arctic and Antarctica is intrinsically tied to our ability to solve the problem of global warming. However, climate change has opened the door to an entirely new set of potentially destructive activities in these areas. Unless we are successful in closing that door, and closing it soon, global warming may simply be the precursor to a host of other problems that threaten to make an already difficult situation far worse in the world's polar regions. Thank you very much.